was through my perception of my own, I guess, and, this is my subjectivity on one level, but I guess it's useful anyways, my own oppression, even if minimal compared to other women. And so for me, whenever the left in a country like Britain talks about feminism and women's liberation, I think that it's important for us all to draw a line between not only across classes, which obviously undeniable and undoubtedly necessary, but also geographically between, I'll come back to the point I already made before, between imperialist or proto-imperialist forces and post-colonial, or what you can call neo-colonized or neo-colonial contexts, which, by the way, can either be an African country, to look for the stereotype, or can be Greece, to a degree. I guess there are levels here, but in any case, I guess you see the point coming from. And so within my analysis, or what I think we as lefties should take into consideration, there are two phenomena here at play. One is obviously the intersectionality of different women's oppressions, individually or collectively, depending on their communities, and so different levels of how they're oppressed. Say, for instance, if we're talking, I think somebody mentioned before, if we're talking about the black community in East London, a woman there has a different experience from her oppression and from her emancipation than a woman like myself, who comes from a fairly bourgeois background, white background in a Western country, would feel. And then, but also the second phenomenon, I guess, so one is this intersectionality of oppression and different levels of oppression, but the other one, and I think this is what is important for us, since we do live in the West, the so-called West, is this narrative and these hegemonic principles that we live in. And I think we've already kind of talked about that before, the question of we live in a society that preaches monogamy, in which there is no other alternative, you have a single or you're in a couple kind of thing. And which are espoused by communities or are infected into communities, and also obviously by the mainstream media, which is a huge, powerful force. And because I come from my original background was marketing and advertising, believe it or not, obviously it strikes a chord with me. And so I guess what I'll talk about before is the fallacies created by capitalism, espoused there in its ideologies, liberalism and neoliberalism, and how it sees feminism and how that is an obstacle for actual emancipatory socialist feminism. And then I'll talk briefly, because I guess to do it properly, I would have to go into much more into depth about solidarity with other feminist struggles. Again, something that I think somebody already mentioned here, because white women's liberation cannot solely just be exported in the same format, kind of cookie cutter way into other struggles. It is wrong, to say the least, if it does so. And again, it does have an influence on the left. There are not few organizations on the left in this country and others that espouse that should be the case. Maybe between the lines, but definitely do. And then to kind of finalize, I guess I'll talk a little bit about socialist feminism, but I think Jane will ultimately talk more about that, so it's a good way to pass on it. In this country, like in other countries, and when I say this, I kind of put both my hats on as Portuguese and as an honorary Londoner, because I've lived here for quite a while now, which obviously are usually these imperialist, proto-imperialist countries that I was talking about before. The mainstream idea about women's oppression is that, generally speaking, we have overcome. There might be a few glass ceilings to shatter. Interestingly, point maybe I'll diverge here, but on the question of Thatcher breaking the glass ceiling, I saw a good quote from Russell Brand, I think, in his piece for The Guardian, saying, only in the way that she, these shards of glass fell on all other women's eyes when they went down. Because there wasn't even a woman in her cabinet, as far as I understand. And there hasn't been any woman prime minister since. So, in what way was she an example? One not to follow, perhaps. But in any case, So yeah, like the idea here is that, yeah, sure, maybe you need to rectify a couple of things, instill a couple of quotas here and there, what is it, a positive discrimination, a lovely term, but otherwise we're good. And in seminal cultural events, which is my favorite topic, like Sex and the City, have shown, the idea is that, girl, you can vote, you can get a job, you can control your reproductive means, you get a credit card, you get a dildo, presto, you're emancipated. And this is it, like, you get a credit, again, you look and, I'm sorry if I'm again going to go into something that's very my generation, but Destiny's Child made a song where they broke through all the charts, was Survival, and one of the main lines was, I pay my own bills. This is the idea that if you can pay your own bills compared to your mothers who perhaps couldn't pay it and your father had to, this is kind of the underlying line, you are emancipated. This is obviously, a huge fallacy. So I found a good quote, if we're going to go back to quotes, by Kollontai, who said that, where the official and legal, and this is actually from that period of 1917, again, the topic that we've approached before, on how things were being changed. And she's already pointing out perhaps the problems or the lacks, the little holes in what was trying to be built. Where the official and legal servitude of women ends, you can get a divorce, you can get killed, etc. The force we call public opinion begins. And this is what I think for women in Western countries, in so-called, where women are apparently emancipated, is really the strong force. And it was true in Kollontaj's day, and it's true in today's day. I mean, if we look at this movement called Slut Walk, it had lots of shortcomings, but it is ultimately, or was built as an answer to this hypocrisy of the Western world that says women can do this and can do that, but then is very quickly labeling them, even in a more liberal sense, sluts. You do this, you do that, you shouldn't. What was I going to? Yes. So and this is how we then go into things like, first of all, scaremongering very easily, but then also, and labels I've mentioned before, but also, victim blaming. I mean, I saw a quote from Caitlin Moran, who I don't know if you know her, which is a writer, apparently the mostly recognized feminist in this country, or liberal feminist, I should say, advising women not to wear high heels on a night out because the clack, clack, clack of them walking home was like an announcement of, possible rapists. Wear Doc Martens, not because they can kick someone's butt, or also that, but also if you wear high heels, you're like, you'll call a rapist. I'm sorry, don't tell them. It'll go back to the whole slogan of, don't tell us to wear something different, tell them not to rape. And so, this is what women, particularly of my generation, because we don't know better yet. I mean, women, perhaps I'm a bit too old for that now, but women in their formative stages are being confronted with is scaremongering and indoctrination from an actually rather conservative ideology. You cannot do this, you cannot do that. The only things you can do are ultimately mandated by a rather patriarchal, male-dominated narrative. And so, in my opinion, what the left has to do in countries like Britain, particularly a left that is ultimately still, and unfortunately still very white-dominated, is to address these points, first and foremost, within its own structures, as the SLUP instance has shown, but also aside, create environments in which women feel that they are welcome to be and to embrace whatever they want to embrace and to be whatever they want to be. And despite the 60s and the hopes that were nurtured by that person, I think that we're increasingly, particularly in the current context of austerity, seeing it, clamp down on the small victories that we got at the time in terms of women's liberation. So I guess I'll go now into the other side of things. So this is what I feel like we should do as majoritively white middle class left in this country and in other countries in the so-called West. So the second level of it is obviously, I guess, solidarity is the best thing to put it forward, but also like the dynamics, the interaction with, first of all, struggles that are different. in our own local communities, the question of obviously race is undeniable, but also religion. You know, we just had a 10-year war. The Iraq War propelled by this, and Afghanistan occupation propelled by this idea that, you know, we're going to liberate women, as if, you know, this can be done with a few machine guns and hugely masculinized armies. You know, so, but also, it also propelled a narrative of Islamophobia, I guess is a terminology we use today, in which, you know, we saw what France, the law that France has passed I guess a year ago now, maybe a bit more than that, on the ban on the hijab, or at least the burqa, I'm sure. The hijab, I don't know how grey areas, hijab as well, so okay, any form of head covering, I guess, unless it's a hat. You know, if it's a hat, it's fine. It's like this kind of these double standards stand, like, you know, openly there. And so how can we do this? And I guess a good example to bring of what not to do is the recent question of feminine. I believe Ukrainian movement.
Yeah.
Is it Ukrainian? I knew it was from a Eastern European country. That their idea of a topless intifada, I guess is what they call it. Wait, what is it? Was it intifada? Was it jihad? Topless jihad. Yeah. That's it. Was the way to go. And you know, like the stinking stereotypes used and forms of, you know, Orientalism, of creating this other that we addressed in the first conversation as well, are, you know, are terrible, because there is no empathy towards the oppression, the intersectionality, again, as I mentioned earlier on, of the oppression of these other women. So as socialist revolutionaries who are feminists, be as male and women in this room or outside, we need to understand that these struggles need to come from themselves. Their emancipation has to come from themselves, and all we can do is to create an environment in which their struggle is somewhat facilitated, i.e. Struggle with their oppressors, who are probably our peers in terms of class often, and not just, you know, and be by their sides, and, you know, like kind of, we have to go by analogies, arm in arm, rather than impose these cookie cutter solutions of what you got to do. Oh yes, you got to take off your hijab and go and vote, and that's what's going to bring emancipation. No, that's not. So, you know, and obviously, this kind of trickles down all the way to, you know, the oppression of women in, God, I could say anything, sub-Saharan Africa, South America, and so on and so forth, which is a very similar question, in the sense that we have to show empathy and solidarity, but it's very dangerous, and I think ultimately a fallacy if we simply accept that the neoliberal, ultimately independent liberal ideology can somehow liberate them, which I guess goes back to the question of can capitalism emancipate women in any way, which it can advance their emancipation up to a point, but not completely, would be my answer. But then also that, you know, not just your simple, you know, Luxembourg/Sletkin solution can apply. There are other things to take into account. This is not an excuse to then say, oh, you know, like, unfortunately, I've heard some of our SLP comrades argue, oh, you know, like, women who in religious and usually Islamic environments, communities, they have it all figured out, you know, like they're all aware of their oppression, and if they wear the hijab, it's because they want to. There is, you know, this is not that linear. So, you know, ultimately the main lesson out of feminism is not that linear. It's everything is an answer to that. But that, you know, that striking, like, middle terms what we have to find. And I guess that the best way to address that is to, you know, communicate with our sisters, particularly in these environments. I mean, as simple as that, communication is the best key. But certainly, I mean, getting back to my point I was making before, if we underpin it with theoretical points, not simply by, oh, I've seen it happen once, then we're all right. If we just go by once experience, the fact that I met a Muslim woman who liked wearing her hijab, therefore they all like wearing their hijab, and there's nothing I should do, it's the wrong way to go around it. So, I guess that, you know, like, my main point is we have a very arduous struggle against this huge monster that is this hegemonic narrative particularly neoliberalism, but liberalism in general still, that women's emancipation can be easily attained by participating in a society that is ultimately capitalist. I.e., if you participate in capitalism, you will liberate yourself. And that is the main, monster that we have to eradicate. It's a myth. Because not only is it being applied to us women who do have more rights than most women, our sisters in South Africa or wherever else. South Africa perhaps is a better example for white women, surely, but you know what I mean, like in other constructs. But also is being applied to ourselves in this idea that, you have what you wanted. You can now decide whether you can marry or not, or have children or not, or wear a miniskirt or not, and therefore you're emancipated. And that's absolutely not true, and the contradictions of these, prognoses are very obvious. So I guess I'll pass it on to Jane, the question of how socialist feminism should actually be applied.
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do that.
Can I have a 30-second break so I can